Well, in the Northeast, if you're looking at New England and New York, tourism is down between 20 and 60%.
Welcome back. With trade deadlines looming and no G7 summit deal, Canada now preparing to retaliate against the U.S. with new tariffs.
This summer, something unusual is happening across the U.S. Northeast. Airports are emptier, hotels are quieter, retail stores in Boston and New York are reporting soft foot traffic. The reason? Canadian tourists, once a reliable economic boost, are no longer coming. The numbers tell the story. According to Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey, Canadian tourism across New England is down between 20% and 60% compared to previous spring travel seasons. It's not a coincidence. It's the ripple effect of Donald Trump's tariffs on Canada and Ottawa's quiet but calculated response.
We're just not seeing the Canadian tourists in this region. We've had school trips canceled that normally happen in the spring in particular.
The damage isn't confined to airports. School trips from Canadian provinces have been canceled. Regional carriers serving Logan Airport report declines in cross-border traffic. Restaurants and local stores in tourist-heavy districts across New York and Vermont are seeing lower revenue. The tourism sector has become one of the first clear victims of a trade policy few expected to hit consumers so directly.
The Northeast region, and they're also seeing it in Florida as well, by the way. Numbers are way down in terms of Canadian tourists.
And it's not just the Northeast. Florida, a longtime magnet for Canadian visitors during the winter and spring, is also seeing steep declines. These missing travelers are pulling millions in lost revenue out of the U.S. economy, not with protests or tariffs, but simply by staying home.
U.S. wine exports to Canada plunged in April. They were down more than 90%.
While tourists are disappearing, so is the wine. In April 2025, U.S. wine exports to Canada dropped by a staggering 93% year over year, based on trade data reported by CBC News and the American Association of Wine Economists. That's not a typo. 93%. Before the tariffs, Canada accounted for over one-third of U.S. wine exports by value, largely higher-end wines averaging $7.50 per bottle, significantly above the global average export price of $5. With those exports now nearly halted, U.S. producers are facing a glut in supply. Wineries in California, where 93% of U.S. wine is produced, are now left with surplus stock and falling prices. Bulk buyers like the UK still exist, but at much lower prices. Premium markets like Canada and China are closing. Overall, U.S. wine exports fell 43% in April 2025 compared to April 2024. The fallout isn't theoretical. It's hitting balance sheets across agriculture, logistics, and distribution.
It's a recognition that these are allies, long-standing relationships that just shouldn't be ripped up, shredded overnight.
Beyond travel and wine, broader economic pressures are emerging on both sides of the border. In the U.S., tariffs on Canadian aluminum and steel are already being passed down to consumers. A 2025 report from the Healey administration estimates that New England households could see a combined $2.5 billion increase in heating bills over the next several years, driven by higher costs of imported materials. Meanwhile, small businesses in retail, food service, and even health sectors are seeing higher input costs. Many are now reconsidering Canada-based suppliers or trimming operations. In Canada, the pressure is more indirect, but real. Supply chains connected to U.S. markets are strained. Exporters are adjusting to bypass American ports, and consumers are seeing delays in substitution on imported goods. This is no longer a tariff dispute at the policy level. It's an everyday economic problem for workers, consumers, and local economies.
Carney is determined to protect Canadian businesses.
We're willing to sign a security and economic or commercial agreement with the United States that's in Canada's best interest, and only that.
Prime Minister Mark Carney has kept his words measured, but his timeline is now fixed. If no trade deal is reached with the U.S. by July 21st, Canada will impose new tariffs on American steel and aluminum. The announcement came less than 3 weeks after the G7 summit in Alberta, where Trump signed a separate deal with the UK but left negotiations with Canada unresolved. Carney has said Canada is open to a bilateral agreement, but only one that aligns with its national interests. His strategy is pressure without escalation. Let the economic damage speak louder than political rhetoric. Canada didn't shout. It didn't launch a campaign. It just stepped back. The drop in tourists, the collapse in wine exports, and rising consumer costs, these are the quiet consequences of a trade war that's no longer theoretical. And while Trump's tariffs continue to stir debate in Washington, the real impact is being felt in store aisles, gas bills, and unsold crates of California wine. This isn't just about policy anymore. It's about pain. And who's willing to end it first?
Yesterday, Prime Minister Mark Carney said that on July 21st, depending on how negotiations go with the United States over a new trade agreement, we'll make adjustments, necessary adjustments on July 21st.
Donald Trump raised tariffs. Mark Carney didn't retaliate, at least not right away. Now, the 30-day clock is ticking. Canada and the U.S. have until July 21st to strike a new deal, or face another round of economic escalation. This isn't just about steel or aluminum. It's about control, strategy, and whether a former central banker can outmaneuver a sitting U.S. president at his own game. In early June, the Trump administration doubled tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, from 25% to 50%. It was the sharpest escalation since the so-called reciprocal tariff policy returned in April. Canada didn't hit back immediately. There were no matching retaliatory tariffs. No angry press conferences. Instead, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada would review its response by July 21st and adjust countermeasures based on progress in the negotiations. The date wasn't random. It marks exactly 30 days after Carney and Trump met briefly at the G7 summit in Alberta. There, both sides agreed to fast-track a trade agreement within a one-month window. Carney's decision to delay action was intentional. It gave Canada time to build leverage and put pressure on the U.S. to engage seriously without locking both sides into a tit-for-tat spiral too soon.
Speaking in Brampton, the Premier said he's confident there will be a fair trade deal between Canada and the U.S. within the next 27 days. But if not, Doug Ford insists Ontario will keep up the pressure on the Trump administration.
That doesn't mean Canada is staying quiet. Behind the scenes, the response is taking shape. In Ontario, Premier Doug Ford made clear that if Trump's tariffs continue, his province will impose more tariffs of its own. Ford emphasized that Canada buys more U.S. products than Japan, Korea, China, the UK, and Germany combined, and that Ottawa won't let that leverage go unused. At the federal level, Carney is moving on two fronts. First, Ottawa announced a new policy of reciprocal procurement, favoring Canadian suppliers for government projects involving steel and aluminum. This is designed to shield domestic industries and mirror the America First logic used by Trump. Second, the federal cabinet, including Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc, has been holding closed-door meetings with U.S. officials to identify what they're calling key points for a deal. While details haven't been made public, Canadian officials have hinted the talks include tariffs, border infrastructure, and illicit trade, particularly fentanyl trafficking. The message is clear. Canada is building unity and preparing pressure points. But the final move depends on what happens in Washington. The July 21st deadline isn't just a political marker. It carries real economic consequences. If no agreement is reached, Canada is expected to raise tariffs on U.S. metals and possibly expand retaliation to other sectors. That could hit U.S. exporters, just as the domestic manufacturing sector is already grappling with higher borrowing costs and weak consumer demand. The auto industry is particularly exposed. Canada is a key supplier of components and materials used in U.S. vehicle production. Any disruption to steel or aluminum flows could ripple through factories in Michigan, Ohio, and Illinois, many of them in politically sensitive regions. On the Canadian side, uncertainty is already weighing on investment. Industry groups say businesses are hesitant to expand or hire amid fears of tariff instability. Carney, for his part, has said little publicly. But insiders suggest the Prime Minister is working to balance pressure with pragmatism, giving Trump space to shift course while signaling that Canada won't wait forever.
We don't know what those details are. They've been pretty, tight-lipped on what specifically a new agreement could look like between Canada and the U.S., as to be expected.
As July 21st approaches, the question isn't just whether a deal can be made. but whether the delay was a mistake or a masterstroke. Trump moved first, but Carney held his move. Now, with the clock winding down, Canada's next step could shape not just the deal, but the future of North American trade diplomacy. In this showdown of tariffs and tactics, it may come down to who blinks first. And right now, neither side is blinking.
President Trump and I agreed to pursue negotiations towards a deal within the coming 30 days.
Katie, what did Mark Carney need to accomplish here?
The simple answer is do no harm and really make sure that he doesn't have additional challenges to deal with that he didn't have before the summit started.
The G7 summit in Alberta ended without a joint statement. President Trump left early, and attention quickly shifted to other global flashpoints. But behind the scenes, Canada and the United States quietly agreed to a 30-day window to reach a new trade and security deal. For Prime Minister Mark Carney, it's a crucial opportunity to ease the pressure of U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum. For the White House, it may be just another way to apply leverage. This deal is more than symbolic. It sets the stage for a fast-moving and high-stakes negotiation. Just before Trump's departure, he and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney agreed to a tight deadline: 30 days to finalize a new economic and security partnership. According to CBC News, Carney said the goal was to mitigate the damage from U.S. tariffs in exchange for cooperation on border security, fentanyl, and smuggling control. But here's the catch. While Canada is actively putting forward specific proposals, senior Canadian officials told Radio Canada that the U.S. has yet to offer anything in return. Carney himself admitted that having a deadline helps focus negotiations. But he also noted Canada won't wait forever. At this point, there is no signed agreement, no draft text, no mutual concessions on paper, just a handshake and a ticking clock.
In parallel, we must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses from the unjust U.S. tariffs that exist at present.
While waiting for Washington to respond, Canada has taken decisive action to shield its domestic steel and aluminum sectors. Prime Minister Carney announced a suite of countermeasures designed to both pressure the U.S. and stabilize Canada's internal market. One of the key actions is the planned adjustment of existing retaliatory tariffs on U.S. steel and aluminum, set for July 21st, the end of the 30-day window. The level of adjustment will depend on the progress of negotiations. Canada is also tightening procurement rules. Only domestic producers and firms from countries with reciprocal trade agreements will be eligible to bid on federal infrastructure projects involving steel and aluminum. This effectively sidelines U.S. suppliers unless an agreement is reached. To prevent trade circumvention, Canada is introducing 100% tariff quotas on select steel imports from third countries. These measures aim to block cheap steel, often rerouted from countries like China, from undermining local production. The government has also established 2 new task forces, one for steel, one for aluminum, to monitor international trade trends and advise on rapid policy responses. Additionally, a $10 billion Canadian loan facility has been made available to large domestic manufacturers to help maintain liquidity and production continuity. These actions signal that Canada is not just reacting to external pressure. It is actively building a defensive posture in anticipation of prolonged trade friction. As Canada prepares, the United States appears increasingly distracted. President Trump has returned to Washington to focus on escalating tensions in the Middle East, particularly the conflict between Iran and Israel. This shift in focus raises concern that the 30-day deadline could pass without meaningful engagement from the U.S. side. Meanwhile, Canadian steel-producing regions, especially in Ontario and Quebec, are watching nervously. The impact of a 50% U.S. steel tariff remains severe, and uncertainty about trade conditions only deepens the strain on workers and businesses. Mark Carney has emphasized the importance of resilience and forward planning, rather than relying on past frameworks or expectations. His government is treating the 30-day period not as a diplomatic formality, but as a critical economic pivot point.
I stress Canada's readiness to work to create new international partnerships to promote a world that's more secure, prosperous, just, and free.
This isn't just a negotiation, it's a stress test for Canada-US trade. Ottawa has put its proposals on the table and launched its own protections. Washington, for now, is keeping its options open. As July 21st approaches, time is running out. The outcome could define trade between the two countries for years to come.